Hello, welcome to another day of the Internet Measurement Village. We're delighted to have joining us today Julie Owono, the Executive Director of Internet Sans Frontières. She'll be telling us all about advocating against internet shutdowns in West Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, Julie.
Hi, Arturo, and thanks so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. So, shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, awesome. So I believe you're seeing my screen. So I will go to the presentation, and I hope you still see everything, right? So thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, like I said, to discuss with you the advocacy, how to advocate against internet shutdown, how we have been doing it, at least at Internet Sans Frontières. So the image you're seeing here is a campaign that we're going to talk about, of course, which was one of our biggest success, internet shutdowns wise. But before we dig further into the issue, I thought it would be important to introduce ourselves to the audience, because not everybody will know Internet Sans Frontières. So Internet Sans Frontières, or Internet Without Borders in English, is a French nonprofit which was created in 2008 in France. At the time, well, actually, it was created when the junta in Myanmar had shut down internet to the country already in 2007. So Internet Sans Frontières was created in reaction to that, because activists who were based in France at the time thought that it was a dangerous trend that should be denounced. And so that's how Internet Sans Frontières started, so which means how much the issue of censorship and connectivity mean to us. So from a French nonprofit, where we have grown now to a network of local Internet Sans Frontières, or Internet Without Borders. We are present in Latin America, in Brazil in particular, and we're also very present in Africa, various countries, Chad, very soon Liberia, Togo, many other places that I can't remember now, but all those places are doing a great job in defending freedoms, and freedom of expression in particular, and access to internet. So as I said, we were really very early on in our path, interested in the issue of censorship, and particularly of government's ability to suppress free expression and connectivity to populations. I mentioned the example of the junta in Burma, but I would say that the trend, if you allow me the expression, the trend of internet shutdowns really became, I think, I would say a thing, excuse me the expression again, really around 2016. I will give some examples. In early 2016, we were alerted by colleagues in the Republic of the Congo, which has Brazzaville as a capital city. It's located in Central Africa, close to the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in 2016, during the presidential election, I would say the presidential re-election of the president there, who has been around for more than 30 years and has been, holding quite a heavy fist on people and on their freedoms. So in order to secure his re-election, he, in 2016, shut down all communication. So SMS, mobile lines, and also, of course, internet connectivity, landlines, and also mobile internet. At the time, the move shocked a lot of people because it's something that had never been done before. People were surprised. And even telecommunications operator, who we will see play, unfortunately for them, a huge role in the censorship, in the sense that they are the ones who have to pull the plug, basically. And so in 2016, when the government of Congo decided that every communication should be shut down, everybody was in shock. We received, at Frontières, we received alerts even from telecommunications operator in the country. So when we received those alerts, we thought this is going to become, unfortunately, something to monitor very closely, because we know how much repressive regimes get inspiration from each other. So if we thought, if we are silent or if nothing happens against the internet shutdown in Congo, it's going to spill over to other countries, to other neighboring countries. And that's exactly what happened. After the Congo example, a few months later, a country also in Central Africa, Western Central Africa, I would rather say, a country named Gabon, also ruled by the same family since the 1960s, so since the independence of the country. The government also shut down internet there during the presidential election. And it went so on and so forth until, I would say, even as we're speaking today. Not in Gabon, but the trend spilled over in other countries. So at the time when we saw this, we thought we should do something. And that's when our friends at Access Now created the Keep It On Coalition, which Internet Sans Frontières was one of the first members. We joined, I think, in July 2016, if I remember well. And well, very early on, we saw that, first of all, shutdowns are, of course, became a political arm at the time. And most importantly, that they were multifaceted. So it was not just, it was not just about politics, but we soon saw that it was also about economics, about social issues, about human rights issues, obviously, because of the freedom of expression, which was suppressed. So there were many aspects to the issue. So we thought this requires a multidisciplinary approach. So although we are a digital rights advocacy and human rights advocacy organization, we should not only focus on that, because in front of us, governments do not only focus on that. They add multiple layers to their repression. So we should probably do the same to advocate against that repression. So based with this idea that multidisciplinarity, or probably multi-stakeholderism, which is a big word at the moment, was something that we wanted to push for. So we thought, okay, this will be a great occasion to work with our local partners and local organizations that we have, who have the best expertise, the best knowledge of what that censorship looks like and what that censorship means. I personally, fortunately, have never yet experienced a time when a government suppressed my freedom of expression and suppressed my access to internet. But those people who we work with in those countries which have experienced it have way more, knowledge about that than I do. So we thought to advocate better, we should work with them, and we should connect them with the knowledge, with the expertise that exists in countries that have not experienced this type of censorship, but where researchers and activists and also technology communities are developing methodologies to fight against this. So we should pair that local and localized expertise with that knowledge that is being produced in Western universities or in Western organizations. So that's been really at the core of how we do things. For instance, whenever there is a censorship event, whenever we receive an information regarding censorship event, what I would usually do is to spam Maria, the excellent Maria from the OONI team, and tell her, Maria, please, it's an emergency, XYZ countries doing this, and I've received XYZ messages. Can I connect you with the community there? And she's like, yes, please do. So yeah, thank you, Maria, for always being around and bearing with me. So connect, as I said, communities with each other. Most importantly, intersect issues as well. Because like I said, shutdowns are, of course, a political tool that is used by governments to repress and suppress freedom of expression. Because I didn't mention this, what we saw with this trend is that it was mostly used during very tense political moments. So elections or demonstrations against the regime or debates on social media, and increasingly, the issue of hate speech is being put forward as a reason to shut down the internet access. We'll get back to that. But yes, we understood that it's not only about political issues, but that, of course, economic issues are also involved. And by that, I mean that when you shut down internet infrastructure of a country, even when it's just social media platforms, it does have an economic impact and an economic cost. And the thing is that at that time, we as organizations, we didn't really have the tools to calculate this. We just knew, we thought that, of course, it will have an impact, because when you prevent people from using the internet, to interact or to do business, like we have seen a lot of people in Cameroon, for instance, where I come from, a lot of people there use WhatsApp to sell their products, to sell their services as well. So when you shut down WhatsApp for a day for someone, it has an economic impact, which will afterwards impact the whole national economy. So intersect with economic issues, intersect with other social issues, and particularly at Internet Sans Frontières, we work a lot on the digital gender gap. So this gap that results in men more likely to access the internet and profit from the internet than women. Basically, these are inequalities that we find in the offline world, which are mirrored and transposed to the online world as well. So obviously, when you shut down internet, it further it furthers this gap, because, well, if women are already in a normal situation, less likely to get connected, it's going to be and create opportunities for themselves, including economic opportunities, which will in turn allow them to, participate more in the global conversation by purchasing more internet bundles. Well, if you suppress that internet access in the first place, you cut out basically economic opportunities and then the ability of participating in the global conversation. So yeah, we thought it's important to intersect issues, and that's something that we always try to put in our advocacy strategies. So not only focus on the human rights implications, which are, of course, for us the most important. That's the first thing that we put forward, and that's why measuring and being able to prove that there is a censorship is important. But on the other hand, it's also important for us to include in that advocacy issues around economy, issues around social issues, because it helps you target other publics. And by public, I mean not only citizens and users, but I also mean organizations. So attract the attention of economy or institutions on the issue of internet shutdown. Internet is not only, for entertainment, it's also for economic opportunities. So when countries decide to shut themselves out, they also, shut themselves down from the global network, they're also affecting the economy. So yeah, that's for the advocacy strategy. They have to be intersectional, at least from our perspective at Internet Sans Frontières, and we always try as much as possible to do that. The other thing that we have been doing to fight this specific censorship, it has been to anticipate as much as possible. Like I said, we saw that this trend was intersecting with political events, debates on social media, usually debates that are against the power, because repressive regimes, they're struggling to adapt to this new reality in which information does not only come from one source anymore, one source usually being a state-controlled media, but it can come from anywhere, and it can come from random citizens taking a video of police brutality, like we have seen very recently in the US, for instance. But although to some extent, US is not a repressive regime, but I thought this example would speak to everyone. But what we are seeing increasingly, as I was saying, is that hate speech and disinformation are also used increasingly as a justification. I'm mentioning these two specific issues to show how important it is always to intersect issues when you do advocacy against internet shutdowns. Because what we saw increasingly was that we as civil society organization and as free expression advocates, we usually focus a lot of our attention on the importance of being able to say whatever you want to say, on the importance of freedom of expression. But we have to be aware that freedom of expression must be the principle, but in certain societies where there are not institutions that are strong enough to be able to limit the negative effect of certain speeches or certain disinformation campaigns, it's important to, speech is important. It's important to pay attention to it, and to some extent, it may be necessary to limit it. But of course, we do not agree with governments that use the dangerosity of certain speeches and certain disinformation campaigns to further repress and justify their censorship. But we thought if we don't add this aspect in our advocacy, we risk a backlash. And we saw this in 2018 in a particular country which I know very well, which is Cameroon. In Cameroon, I will talk about it later a bit more, but we had a huge internet shutdown, one that is now known, I think, as the longest one in Africa. Sorry, I don't know the equivalent of the word I'm looking in English, but let's say it's one of the longest one in Africa. It's known as one of the longest one in Africa, but I will get back to that. In 2018, so there is a war in that country too, and it's important to mention. And of course, the war is being transposed as well on social media platforms. In particular, the government is using disinformation against a group of separatists who are opposing the central state. And in turn, that group is also using disinformation campaigns against the government. But what we saw also is that both parties were using hate speech to further polarize the society and further justify the war. And the problem was that social media platforms were not doing a thing, and they're still not doing enough, in our opinion. They're doing they're doing their best, but they're definitely not doing enough in proportion to the problem, to the extent of the problem. And when we advocated in 2018, a bit before the presidential election, when we advocated against the internet shutdown, we received a lot of messages from communities who told us, okay, we agree internet is important, but at the same time, we don't want an internet that, further divides us and incites hatred. So we, to some extent, understand that the government or that somebody has to shut down the internet. And this was quite worrying, to be honest. But a few months before that, another country in Asia, in South Asia particularly, Sri Lanka, also, there was also a discussion on the opportunity, or at least the necessity, to sometimes censor social media platforms, access to social media platforms, because of the inability of social media platforms to deal with hate speech. And unfortunately, that hate speech did have real world consequences, and particularly around violence, and violence against Muslim populations in particular. So we thought we should integrate this in our advocacy, not saying that governments have the right to shut down the internet. We think that's always definitely a bad solution. Even when you want to deal with an issue, you create other issues. So it's absolutely not the way to go around. But it's important to acknowledge this in the campaigns that we do. We understand hate speech is a problem, disinformation is a problem, but there are other ways to go around this, and other ways that involve governments not censoring. That's definitely not the way we want to go. There are other ways to work around this. So yes, it's important to anticipate. But one lesson that we got from our advocacy campaigns in various places is that it's also very important to train communities, train them particularly on the importance of measuring censorship. That's something that we saw was essential, because, when people, like what happens to us, when people email you in an emergency and tell you, I don't know, my network is a bit floppy today, I don't know what that means. Could it be that there is a censorship? Or even when people want to contact you, but it's already too late, especially through social media platforms. It's important. We thought it was important for them to be trained in anticipation. So trained not only on the existence of measurement tools. So if a day you have a doubt, your network is a bit, unstable, just download OONI app. We've worked with so many people and told them to download the app and test it and use it. But not only train them on internet measurement tools, but also on circumvention tools. Circumvention is something that is not known by so many communities, despite the fact that censorship has been around for so long. I usually say that repressive regimes are sometimes, unfortunately, way more organized than civil society and, grassroots communities, because, when they want to shut down, they have a network. They call the telco, who will then call whoever operates the network, and then they will do whatever is necessary in a very short amount of time. It's getting even shorter now. But we, facing this, usually where we used to be in state of emergency, they're going to shut down, or they have shut down social media. What do I do? So yeah, increasingly we thought it's important in anticipation also to train communities as much as possible, create networks of response against censorship. And it's something that we're also working on a lot. Another thing that we think is essential in doing advocacy against censorship is to educate governments. I was saying that many of these governments, especially the repressive ones, have a hard time adapting to 21st century, including adapting to the fact that internet allows for information not to be controlled anymore by anyone. So it's important to educate them that they can benefit. I mean, if they want to benefit from the internet, and that's what many of them want to do, they cannot sacrifice free expression. You cannot you cannot get the benefits from the openness of the internet if you suppress that openness every time you don't agree with what people are saying or what people are doing with the network. Because by doing that, the example I gave earlier, you're cutting economic opportunities for your population. You're cutting creativity. We're seeing how, especially in Africa is being one of the youngest continent in the world. But it's also a continent where unemployment is has the highest rates. So we saw how communities, how younger generations there are so creative in using those platforms, using platforms allowed by the internet to showcase their talent, to open opportunities for themselves, which they would have never had in a local market that is so harsh, a local job market that is so harsh for them. So we tell government whenever we can that you cannot sacrifice this just for the sake of controlling the information, because it's going to be detrimental for you in the longer term. If you don't create opportunities for people, you create resentment. You create, basically you plant the seeds of the discontent that you will want to fight, in the next month by shutting down the internet. So it's counterproductive. Instead, adapt. Open up yourself. First of all, what we have seen is that indeed internet has forced so many governments, especially in Africa, to do something that they didn't do before, which was communicate with their constituencies, with their citizens, which seems very normal in any rule of law and any democracy-based communities and countries, societies. But it was not that obvious for many. So one thing that the internet has brought is that openness. So we want to make sure, we educate them as much as we can on the fact that openness will not make them lose anything. On the contrary, it will make them gain much more than. And if in the run they have criticism, criticism is actually a great thing because it forces you to evolve. This seems very basic, and I'm sorry if that's not. It's something that you find obvious. It's true. For us, it's obvious, but I promise, for many repressive governments, it's still something that's not so. How can I put this very politely? It's not so obvious. Let's put it that way. So educate governments. Work with telcos is another aspect of what we think is important. Telcos, as I said, play a huge role, I would say a central role in that censorship. They're willingly or not. We know that many telcos do not agree with that, but they have licensing agreements and all these things, which we understand. We also are regularly aware of the fact that it's also a danger for telco operators in certain very repressive countries where some of the CEOs, for instance, were arrested for not complying, for refusing to comply with a shutdown order. So we understand the constraints, but we also think it's important for them either to create alternatives. So, for instance, communicate, first of all, on what's happening. This is something that wasn't so obvious only 4 years ago. When the network was shut down, it was shut down. When you couldn't access Facebook, you couldn't access Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever. But nobody would tell you what was happening. And that's where it was so essential to have network communities, network measurement tools such as OONI, because it was the only way for us at some point to have a confirmation of something happening and being wrong. So we went from that state to increasingly telcos either communicating in text messages to their clients, informing them that, well, due to circumstances beyond our control, and you would usually understand that means they received a letter from a communications minister or regulator or whatever, from the government, asking them to shut down. So either sending this type of messages to their clients, or also that's something that we're pushing more, trying to repair the harm that has been done by either giving free access to internet once internet is resumed, full access of internet is resumed, or by at least making an effort with regards to cost of access to internet after internet is resumed. Why is that important? It's because when we talk about Africa and West Africa in particular, we're talking about one of the regions where internet is the most expensive in the world. I don't have figures in mind now, but basically it's a luxury for many people to be able to get online and do basic stuff as sending WhatsApp messages. So when doing the internet shutdowns advocacy, we talked with many telcos, and I remember one example in particular. It was in Chad, which is located in Central Africa. We are our partners there. We have a local Internet Sans Frontières there being set up. So our partners there, well, they sued telcos, first of all. They sued them for their alleged role in the social media censorship that happened there in between 2018 and 2019, which lasted more than a year. And they sued them, but they also lobbied them and told them, you need to repair what you have done. And we're quite happy that a few weeks after we met them, after our partners met them, and well, basically threatened them and told them, hey, we're gonna expose you and we're gonna tell people not to buy anything anymore from you guys. Well, they were forced to lower the cost of access to internet. So we were really happy that they decreased that, because it really helped communities. Well, it's still not perfect, of course. It's still expensive, but we saw that there was, something that we could use to leverage. I mean, yeah, we could use it to advance our aim, which is ultimately to make sure that everybody's online and able to express herself or himself. So it's important to work with them. I say with and not against, because again, I truly believe, probably naively, but I'm optimistic, that many of the telcos don't want to be associated with censorship. It costs them a lot of money not having anyone using internet for 2 weeks, 6 months, a year, like we've seen. So it's important to work with them. And yeah, continue this whole process, intersect issues all the time, anticipate all the political events, hate speech, disinformation, train communities always on internet measurement tools and also on circumvention tools, educate governments. It's important to engage with them. That's a lesson that we have learned in the past. When you engage with them, it actually helps you gain even more victories. Work with telcos, as I was just saying, and basically continue. So thanks so much for your attention. This was a bit long, but I thought it was important to, set the big picture. Here, from now, I will give you some examples of successful campaigns that we did in the past. So here is, you see an image showing outages and instabilities that were identified in Gabon in 2016. I mentioned Gabon at the introduction of this discussion as a country that very soon implemented internet shutdowns as a tool of repression. So one interesting thing with Gabon is that they actually created a new concept that wasn't known at the time, which is internet curfews. As you're seeing here, you're seeing the scale of instability and the quasi-symmetry of network resumptions and network suppression. So for us at the time, we I don't know if OONI existed, but obviously we didn't work with OONI yet, and I'm sorry. We should have worked together. But anyway, at the time we had some public data available, including from a network which was great at the time, but which has now been purchased by a commercial company anyway. But they did produce some very interesting graphics which we could use, and this one was one of them, which helped, show exactly how regularly internet was shut down and put back. So basically, internet would be shut down from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Yes, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and would be put back from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. The idea at the time of the Gabonese government was, so we identified this and we alerted, research communities and told them you have tools to see this, and that's how we came across this graphics, which was very helpful. But what we got as an explanation from the government was that they understand that shutting down the internet is bad for the economy, so they're putting it back during the workday, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. to allow people to go to work. But they would shut it down in the evening because usually people in the evening are at home and, looking at the news or doing activism on social media, etc. So yes, that was a rationale behind this. We found it's an interesting example. We haven't seen it used elsewhere because obviously the methodologies are even more sophisticated now. Some countries will even resort to very localized censorship to make it even more difficult to identify unless you have people in the area where internet is being suppressed. A country like the DRC did that at some point. They shut down certain areas. Afterwards, they did shut down the whole internet, but at the beginning, they shut down certain areas in 2019 in the aftermath of the presidential election. So Gabon was a very interesting example. They had another shutdown also in January 2019, which didn't last long. I think it lasted a few hours on a day during an attempted coup that was done by military of the country. And basically, yes, the government ordered telcos to shut down the internet to prevent, insecurity. Basically, that's what they were saying, which is another very bad way to go. When you're facing security issues, definitely don't shut down the internet, because one of the things that you're doing is that in case of emergency, people are not able to, communicate with emergency services and tell them where they are. I have in mind this example. If you remember, in Nairobi in 2019, there was a terror attack, and some of the people who were trapped in the buildings attacked, explained that having connectivity at that time helped them, coordinate with the anti-terrorism forces, but also with emergency services to coordinate where help was needed. So yes, it's important to have this in mind whenever you shut down the internet for national security. And then we had this campaign, which I was mentioning also at the beginning of our conversation, which was Bring Back Our Internet. So Bring Back Our Internet is a hashtag that me and other prominent activists from Cameroon and the diaspora created and had trending on Twitter for so long, for 3 months, basically 3 months, because what happened, it was in 2017, January 2017, I received an alert from some of my colleagues in Cameroon telling me, be careful, something is wrong with the network. something's going to happen. And a few hours later, indeed, internet was shut down not in the whole country, but in 2 specific regions of the country, which are the English-speaking regions. Sorry, I'm looking at the time. Oh, I'll wrap up very soon. So the English-speaking regions where separatists are, at the time they were not separatists, but they were advocating for better inclusion of English-speaking people in Cameroon. Cameroon is supposed to be a bilingual country. I say it's supposed because obviously there are issues with marginalizing some populations. Anyway, so there were these regions where people were demonstrating and sharing images of the repression, because there was a harsh repression by the regime. And in response to that, the government decided to shut down the internet. So for 3 months, we were out there advocating against that shutdown through this hashtag, Bring Back Our Internet, which was used to, alert the world, basically. I remember even Edward Snowden tweeted about that, saying that be careful to what's happening in Cameroon, because it might well happen very soon also in our countries. And yeah, recent developments, especially in the US, are suggesting that, yes, indeed, we must always pay attention. So I'll go rapidly. So as I was saying, we partnered with OONI at several occasions, including during a social media disruption which happened during the presidential election. So it's not a question mark anymore. It was indeed a social media disruption. So as I said, I sent a lot of messages to Maria, who was always very available. And again, we thank her for that. And we thank the whole OONI community for a tool that is so essential for communities in Africa. We also did very recently a big campaign on internet in Chad. So to mark 1 year social media censorship, we organized a Twitter chat. We also advocated, as I said, we sued telcos. To some extent, so we tried to sue the government, but obviously, the court is not that independent. They're trying their best, but it's difficult. So they dismissed our case, but at least we're happy that we introduced it, because it opened up people fear government. People fear repressive governments. So when you show that it's possible actually to sue them, just the idea of suing them and telling them you're not allowed to do whatever you want to do. There are rules, there is a constitution, there are international conventions that you sign. You cannot do anything that you want. It's already a big step. And although we were dismissed, we nevertheless got a whole bunch of information, including we got a copy, and this was unique. We got a copy of the order that telcos received from the Ministry of Interior, asking them to shut down the network. So for us, it was a very important document. It was the first time this happened in Chad. And it was a proof that indeed, despite what the government was saying, they were shutting down the internet voluntarily, and they were imposing censorship to the country. So that's basically some of the examples, and I'm happy to chat a little bit more about our work in that part of the world. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will, I think, stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that excellent presentation and for all the great work that you and your colleagues at Internet Sans Frontières are doing.
Thank you. Well, it wouldn't have been possible, again, with you guys. And really, shout out to Maria. She's a force of nature.
Yeah.
And you guys, all of you. But I harass a lot Maria. That's why I talk about her.
So speaking of Maria, we have a first question that comes from her. And her question is, how did the internet shutdown in Cameroon impact local communities?
Yes. So the one that happened for 3 months, basically no activity was possible in the southwest and northwest regions, which are the English-speaking regions. So that means that people who were relying on, as I said, social media platforms to be able to sell their products, they couldn't do that anymore, on the one hand. On the other hand, banking activities were disrupted in a country where many people rely on mobile banking. They don't have, the traditional bank accounts that we would know in other parts of the world, but they rely a lot on, mobile networks to be able to do operations. And this was disrupted definitely by, not being able to access mobile internet. The other thing that was so, complicated was that at the time in that part of the country, there was a community called the Silicon Mountain. So it was a community of startups which were trying to model the, Silicon Valley, not everything about it, but at least get inspiration, getting inspired to create a Silicon Mountain where entrepreneurs and startups from Cameroon could also create products that could be sold in Cameroon, but also worldwide. And it was quite a good community. There were people who, used, who made money with that. But when internet was shut down, all that collapsed. Even until today, it's still struggling. Many of them had to flee. They had to go away out of the country, even for some of them. So the country has lost a pool of talent, a pool of creativity, as I was, discussing during my presentation. Beyond that, of course, the human perspective, not being able to contact your loved ones through WhatsApp was very hard, especially for folks in the diaspora who relied on WhatsApp because, the phone is so expensive. Calling from the US to Cameroon is still very expensive, and from Europe too. So people use WhatsApp mostly. Not being able to do that for 3 months, can you imagine? Especially in a place where there is a war, like an actual war, people are being killed. It was very complicated, and that's why so many people decided to rise up. Yeah, the situation was truly, truly unfair, and we try to push back from the legal perspective too. Access Now. We joined Access Now, another organization, in a lawsuit against the government, which was obviously, it was kind of dismissed. They kept on, pushing the hearings and pushing them until, everybody was tired. But at least we did it, and it was important. So yeah, a lot of very negative impacts, unfortunately.
So we have another question that comes from Tunde. And the question is, it starts off by saying, the lack of organization within civil society during internet shutdowns, which you mentioned, is also something that I have noticed in my research. Mm-hmm. What steps is your organization taking to address this within the communities you work with?
So to address the lack of civil society organizations.
Exactly, like the fact that during internet shutdowns, yes, organizations within civil society are not well organized, and so yes, what steps are being taken to address this problem?
Yes, really, anticipation is key. It's the only answer. Like I said, governments are way more organized. Of course, they have way more money, but it's not only about money. It's having the infrastructure in place. So having people know that they can measure any censorship event, is essential. Having people who can sound the alert, of course, internationally, who are part of communities like the Keep It On community, or who are connected to those who are part of that community, is another very important thing. Having people trained on which VPN to use and which VPN to download, because we do see a surge of VPN downloads, but people download randomly, without reading the privacy policies and data policies and all this. And they end up, giving access to their devices, not only, but also using VPNs that are that consume a lot of internet data. So yeah, it's important to partner, and that's what we try as much as possible to do, to partner with like organizations or even companies that produce VPNs. For instance, last year for Chad, we had a campaign in which we raised money to help people to download and use, well, let's put it that way. We raised money to give to people so that they could buy data bundle. And with this data bundle, they could download and use VPNs, but VPNs from a list of VPN makers that we had gotten from a partner. They could download these VPNs and use them using the bundles that was purchased with the help of the money we had raised. So that's one very important thing to do, to make sure people know where to download what in case they need it. But all this is a matter of anticipation. If you know there is an election, just be ready, because they're going to shut, especially in where the election is unsure, they're going to shut down. If you know there is a problem with disinformation or hate speech in your country, just be ready, because it's just a matter of time before the network is shut down. Just be ready, and as much as possible for us, like Internet Sans Frontières and other organizations who have access, as I said, to the knowledge that is produced, to the tools that are produced, connect them as much as possible with communities, not only in the digital rights communities or people advocating on digital rights, but also beyond. Women's organizations, consumer organizations, that's something we did in Chad, for instance, very successfully. More traditional human rights organizations, I would say. And it's very efficient, because these communities have way more, to be honest, many of them have way more impact than we do, because they have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. So they know people, they have networks too, to whom they can disseminate, the knowledge and capacities that we're trying to share with them. So yes, it's important to anticipate and work as much as possible with organizations that have been in the landscape for longer than you.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Austin.
So we have another question that comes from Chris, and they ask, to what extent do you think an internet shutdown is always illegitimate? Have you encountered shutdowns in Africa or elsewhere that made you doubt whether a shutdown is always a no-go? And they go on saying, I'm not saying shutdowns are not used for repressive authoritarian purposes. Mm-hmm. My own research on shutdown in India, however, makes me increasingly think that not every shutdown is as bad as the other. Sometimes authorities genuinely seem to try to restore law and order with an internet shutdown.
No, that's, thank you, Chris. I would say, really, on the principle, every shutdown is a no-go, because the way they have been deployed, all these countries have signed binding conventions regarding freedoms and human rights, and particularly freedom of expression. And all of these conventions, they mentioned the same thing. The principle, of course, is freedom of expression. And exceptionally, of course, whenever needed, that freedom can be limited, but under certain very strict circumstances. And first of all, the condition, very strict conditions. First of all, the condition that your censorship is legal. It seems weird to say, but you should have a provision that says, in case of XYZ, we can do XYZ because XYZ. We can shut down the internet because, well, I don't know. I've never thought about it, because I personally think we should never shut down the internet. But first of all, it should be legal. Second thing, condition, it should be proportionate. what we're seeing is that most of the time, proportionality, the test of proportionality is not always met. I would say never met, because how can you, I mean, how proportionate can it be that to circumvent one issue, which is very, I would say, how can I put this in English? A very specific issue, you are going to basically undermine, like I said, the rights of millions of people on the one hand, but even beyond that, you're going to affect economically in a very disproportionate way your country without alternatives. That's the thing. That's the second thing, proportionality. The third thing, and that's what we see all the time, is that normally in order to restrain freedom of expression, you must go through the test of a judicial authority. So that means you have to ask the judge, because the judge is the only power, the judiciary power is the only one that can make this right balance between the national security and freedom of expression. You as a government should always go and see that judicial authority so that the judicial authority can tell you, well, in this case, I see there is a balance. I see that probably national security should be more important, and therefore you should shut down the internet, and this is how you should do it. The thing is, no government has done this yet in anticipation. Usually, and it's even more visible because when we as organizations go afterwards to see the judge will say, indeed, this shutdown was absolutely illegal and shouldn't have never happened. We saw that in Zimbabwe, for instance, in 2019, there was a lawsuit that was filed by I think telcos in that country, and also organization, I think MISA Zimbabwe, which is an organization in the country. They filed a lawsuit, and the judge, dismissed the shutdown and said it shouldn't have happened. There are other examples. So in that sense, I would say on the principle, none of these shutdowns, at least in the way they are implemented, are not legitimate. That is not to say that, of course, as I was explaining, we understand there are issues, definitely. Connectivity is not only about positive opportunities. It's all about weaponization, especially weaponization of speech online. But to deal with that, in our opinion, is not through censorship, censoring the whole network. And it's usually when governments do that, they would say, we have to do that because Facebook, Twitter, etc. They don't do anything. And that's true. Facebook, Twitter, and all these social media platforms, which are so easy to develop and scale in Africa, in Asia, or in Latin America, they want to do so without the responsibility, the political responsibility that comes with it. And that is how to make sure that our tools do not have the negative impact, including, causing havoc in peaceful societies. So that's why we say there are other ways to go around this. The other way for us is how can we make these companies more responsible? Not saying that they should be the arbiter of truth, as we have heard, or that they should decide what is right, what it should be said or not on the platform, but that they should work with, on the one hand, governments, of course, because, national security, so they have to be involved, like we're seeing in the US. I was hearing on Friday, I was watching, a hearing, I don't remember at what committee here in the US, where Google, Facebook, Twitter were testifying on what they are doing to prevent other interferences in the upcoming presidential election here in the United States. This is something we're not seeing in those countries. Companies have a hard time, working in such a way. I can understand the constraint because, of course, some of these governments are repressive, but you cannot, they're governments, that's the problem. So either you engage or you're shut down. And not only engage with governments, and that's something that's super important for us, engage with civil society organizations. include them in any discussion you have with regards to speech, and include them to any solution, because they have the knowledge. They know what hate looks like in the societies, because they work with people on the ground and communities every day. So for me, shut down, even when hate speech is involved, even when disinformation is involved, is never a good solution, because it will create a problem. The solutions are elsewhere, including in a proactive collaboration between civil society organizations, private actors, social media, and governments.
Great. Thanks for that very exhaustive answer. I think we have only time for one last question, and this question comes from Norman, and he asks, great work you're doing together with Internet Sans Frontières. How can internet leaders fighting censorship and shutdowns join and get involved in your work?
Well, we're always open to welcoming new people. We are, I would say, I mean, in France, we're rather a small team, but as I said, we work a lot with communities and partners, and also people who want to take on Internet Sans Frontières locally in their countries. So you just drop us an email, and then we have a chat, because we want to make sure we welcome in our great community, great people too. Yeah, we just have a chat and we see what we can do together. Or if there is a project you think we should do together, we're also really open to new collaborations. And if you have a tool, circumvention censorship tool, please get in touch too. We try as much as possible, whenever we can, to pass information about the existence of these tools to communities. Or if you're a digital rights organization, we're also more than happy. We usually try to send letters to government prior to shutdowns, or we could sign letters drafted by organizations in other contexts in other countries. So yeah, there are various ways, either you're an individual, but please get in touch. I'm happy to put my name. It's a private chat, so I will put my email. Oh no, where is it? Is it a public chat or?
What we can do is we can put, if you're okay with it, Julie, we can put your contact information in the video description when we upload it, as well as any links or resources that you think might be useful.
Okay, that's fantastic. I was about to say that's fantastic, but yes, that's fantastic. Thank you.
And yeah, is there anything, any closing thoughts or things that you would like to share with the internet measurement viewers?
Well, yes, please. I was just about to say, please continue doing the great work. We should continue to be aware of the increased sophistication of censorship. We haven't had time to talk about it in detail, but yeah, we should continue to pay attention and continue to have more people use and test their networks in their countries using OONI, and yeah, thanks to the measurement community, because you have been a huge game changer, at least for us who have now the proofs. We can go to court and say, look, OONI says it's written here, it's technical, they've been tested by XYZ people, and so it's yeah, very helpful. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for joining us in this presentation and showing your work, and thanks for all the work that you do in actually making the tools that we build something that end up in the hands of people. So yeah, thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone who was watching and asked questions. It was great. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you to everybody on the internet for joining us. I'll remind you that tomorrow we have another presentation, which will be at 9 a.m. UTC. So it will be several hours earlier than the usual schedule. And it will be a presentation from Khairil Yusuf, who will be talking about measuring internet censorship in Southeast Asia. So we'll see you all there tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye.